My mother forced me into a catering uniform at my sister's engagement gala, demanding I serve guests in silence. She didn't realize the groom's father was currently begging my firm for $3 billion. I served the caviar, then I served their ruin. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The rhythmic beep 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 of the heart monitor was the only sound in the sterile recovery room, a sharp contrast to the chaotic, high-stakes boardroom meetings that usually filled my calendar. I lay there, pale and physically drained, recovering from an emergency appendectomy that had caught me off guard during a midnight merger negotiation. My body felt like lead, and every breath was a calculated effort against the dull ache in my abdomen. My doctor had been stern. Absolute rest, Victoria. No phones, no spreadsheets, no stress. Your body has been running on fumes for years, and it finally hit the brakes. I had intended to listen. For the first time in a decade, I was prepared to let my lieutenants at Apex Vanguard handle the world while I simply existed. But the silence was shattered by the sharp, impatient click of high heels against the linoleum floor. I didn't need to open my eyes to know who it was. The scent of overbearing Chanel No. 5 preceded her like a royal herald. Victoria, for heaven's sake, are you still malingering in that bed? My mother, Beatrice, didn't wait for an answer. She swept into the room, draped in a silk wrap that probably cost more than the hospital bed I was lying in, a wrap I had paid for, though she liked to pretend it came from her personal savings. I had surgery, Mother, I rasped, my throat dry, less than 24 hours ago. Yes, a minor inconvenience, she said, waving a manicured hand dismissively. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't ask if I needed water. Instead, she leaned over me, her eyes glittering with a predatory sort of excitement. Isabella is engaged to a Harrington. Do you have any idea what this means? The Harringtons are old money, Victoria, real, untouchable, global dynasty money. This is the moment I have spent 29 years preparing her for. I tried to offer a weak smile for my younger sister. That's wonderful news. I'm happy for her. Beatrice's expression curdled instantly. She looked me up and down, taking in my hospital gown, my unwashed hair, and the dark circles under my eyes. Well, don't get too excited. We've been discussing the engagement gala. It's in 3 days. It's going to be the social event of the decade. Every major player in the city will be there. I'll try to be there, I whispered. If the doctor clears me. Oh, you'll be there, Beatrice interrupted, her voice dropping into a cold, transactional tone. But not as a guest. Isabella was quite clear, and I agree. You've always been so. Drab, Victoria, you dress like a librarian, you never wear jewelry, and frankly, you look like a ghost right now. Having you sitting at the family table looking like that would be a stain on Isabella's perfect night. The Harringtons value aesthetics above all else. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the IV fluids. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want to be part of this family, you need to be useful, she snapped. I've already told the catering lead that my other daughter would be happy to help out. You'll wear the staff uniform. You'll stay in the shadows, serve the caviar, and keep your mouth shut. If you even think about introducing yourself as the bride's sister or embarrassing us with your dreary presence, I will make sure Isabella never speaks to you again. And frankly, neither will I. We are moving into a different world now, Victoria. A world where you clearly don't fit. She stood up, smoothing her silk wrap, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. She was my mother, the woman I had quietly supported for years, the woman whose lifestyle I had subsidized while she mocked my boring office job. She was choosing a social ladder over her own daughter's health and dignity. I watched her walk toward the door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The 3 days following my mother's visit were a blur of physical pain and cold, calculated clarity. I checked myself out of the hospital against medical advice, my core still tender, my movements slow and deliberate. I spent those 72 hours in my penthouse, a place my mother had never seen, because I knew the sight of my success would only invite her greed and subsequent resentment. I sat by my floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights, clutching a heating pad to my side. My chief of staff, Marcus, had been calling incessantly. "Victoria, the Harrington deal is reaching a critical juncture. Richard Harrington is practically vibrating. He needs that $3 billion bridge loan by Monday morning, or his entire logistics empire collapses like a house of cards. He's begging for a final sign-off." "Tell him I'm considering it," I told Marcus, my voice steady despite the occasional wince of pain. "Tell him I'll give him my final answer after the weekend. I have a personal engagement to attend." The night before the gala, Isabella actually graced me with a visit. She didn't come to check on my recovery, she came to ensure I wouldn't ruin her night. She stood in my entryway, refusing to sit, looking at my modest decor. I preferred minimalist high-end over her preferred gaudy gold leaf with an upturned nose. "Mom told you the plan, right?" she asked, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She was wearing a dress that cost 5 figures, her engagement ring a blinding rock of a diamond. The Harringtons are very traditional. They think our family is charming and refined. If they saw my older sister looking like a frazzled office clerk, they'd start asking questions about our pedigree. "It's just for one night, Victoria. Be a team player." "You want your sister to serve your in-laws caviar in a polyester vest," I said, my voice flat, "while I'm still recovering from surgery." Isabella sighed, an exaggerated theatrical sound. "Don't be so dramatic. You're just standing and walking. It's not like you're digging ditches. Besides, it's not like you have anything better to do. It's not like you have a husband or a life of your own to worry about. Just do this for me, and maybe I'll find a way to get you an invite to the actual wedding, seated in the back, of course." She left without a hug, without a get-well-soon, without a shred of humanity. As the door clicked shut, I leaned against the wall, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. They truly believed I was a nobody. They believed my quiet nature and my refusal to flaunt my wealth meant I was beneath them. Beatrice and Isabella had spent their lives chasing the shadows of the elite, never realizing that I was the one who cast them. I looked at the black catering uniform my mother had sent over via a courier, a cheap, scratchy thing that smelled of industrial detergent. I touched the fabric, my eyes narrowing. They wanted me to be invisible. They wanted me to be the help. They wanted to humiliate me into submission to protect a lie they were telling to a man who was, at this very moment, at the mercy of my pen. I reached for my phone and sent a single text to Marcus. "I will be attending the Harrington Gala tomorrow night. Do not inform Richard. I want to see the state of his empire firsthand before I sign that check." I looked at the uniform again. My mother and sister thought they were putting me in my place. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I didn't just work in the world of high finance. I owned the very ground they were trying to walk on. To understand why my mother and sister felt so comfortable treating me like a second-class citizen, you have to understand the history of the Sterling women. My father passed away when I was 20, leaving us with a mountain of debt and a crumbling reputation. Beatrice, instead of rolling up her sleeves, spent what little remained on appearances, convinced that if we looked rich, the universe would eventually catch up. I was the one who worked 3 jobs through college. I was the one who skipped meals so Isabella could have the right brand of shoes for her private middle school. When I started Apex Vanguard, I kept it a secret. I knew that if Beatrice knew I was making millions, she would spend it faster than I could earn it. So, I lived a modest life in their eyes. I gave them a stipend from my admin job, which they accepted with a sneer, often telling me I should aim higher like Isabella, who was busy networking, which was Beatrice's code for dating wealthy men. Beatrice had become a master of the disingenuous. She was a woman who could compliment your dress while making you feel like you were wearing a trash bag. As I arrived at the Harrington estate through the service entrance the evening of the gala, I saw her in her element. She was standing in the grand foyer, her face a mask of practiced elegance, gushing over the marble floors. Beside her stood the primary antagonist of Isabella's life, the woman who had truly molded her sister into a monster, Aunt Lydia. Lydia was Beatrice's sister, a woman who had married well once and spent the rest of her life acting as the gatekeeper of social standing. Lydia was currently inspecting Isabella's jewelry with a magnifying glass gaze. "It's a start, Beatrice," Lydia drawled, her voice like sandpaper on silk. "But the Harringtons are old money. They can smell a new fortune from a mile away. We must ensure there are no cracks in the facade. Where is that other one? The quiet one?" Beatrice gestured vaguely toward the back of the house. "Victoria is where she belongs, in the kitchen. She's helping with the service." She was quite insistent, really. Said she felt more comfortable among the staff. Lydia chuckled, a dry, mocking sound. "Wise girl, at least she knows her limitations." It's better than having her stumble around the ballroom, trying to make conversation about taxes, or whatever it is she does in that dreary office. I stood in the hallway, hidden by a heavy velvet curtain, listening to them dismantle my character with the casual ease of people discussing the weather. Beatrice wasn't just complicit in my humiliation, she was the architect of it. She was feeding the Harringtons a story of a prestigious, unified family, while literally hiding her eldest daughter in a polyester vest because I didn't fit her brand. I watched as the guests began to arrive, the titans of industry, the political elite, the very people who spent their days trying to get a meeting with me. And there was Beatrice, fluttering around them like a moth to a flame, her eyes constantly darting to the Harrington patriarch, Richard. Richard Harrington was a man who looked like he was carved out of granite, but today he looked brittle. Even from a distance, I could see the sweat on his upper lip and the way his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tuxedo. He was a man on the brink of ruin, pretending to celebrate his son's engagement while his life's work was teetering on the edge of a $3 billion abyss. My mother approached him, her smile wide and syrupy. "Richard, a marvelous evening. My Isabella is just glowing. We are so thrilled to be joining such a distinguished family." Richard gave a tight, distracted nod. "Yes, Beatrice, quite. Excuse me, I'm expecting a very important call." Beatrice didn't notice his distress. She only noticed his status. She turned back to Isabella, whispering loudly, "See, he's a busy man. That's what real power looks like. Not like your sister, who thinks staying late at a desk is work." I tightened the apron around my waist, the surgical staples in my side giving a sharp tug of protest. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and picked up a silver tray of beluga caviar. The grand ballroom of the Harrington estate was a masterpiece of ostentatious wealth. Gilded chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden glow over the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their delicate melodies entirely drowned out by the loud, self-important chatter of the city's so-called elite. I stepped out from the swinging doors of the catering kitchen, the heavy silver tray of beluga caviar and toast points balanced carefully on my left hand to avoid pulling at the fresh surgical incisions on my right side. Every step sent a dull, throbbing ache radiating through my abdomen, a harsh physical reminder of my vulnerability. But as I moved through the room, remaining utterly silent and practically invisible in my cheap, stiff polyester vest, that physical vulnerability began to give way to a cold, hardening resolve. I was no longer just the neglected, disappointed older sister. The sheer audacity of my mother's cruelty, the utter lack of humanity in her demand that I serve at this party while bleeding underneath my bandages, had snapped the final, frayed thread of my familial loyalty. I was no longer the passive victim of Beatrice Sterling's social ambitions. I was the founder of Apex Vanguard, a woman who routinely dismantled predatory corporations before breakfast, and it was time I treated my own family with the same ruthless objectivity I applied to a hostile takeover. I moved methodically from group to group. "Caviar, sir." I would murmur, my eyes fixed firmly on the lapels of their jackets or the stems of their champagne flutes, strictly obeying my mother's command not to make eye contact. They took the appetizers without so much as a glance in my direction. I was a fixture, a piece of the furniture. As I navigated the perimeter of the room, I kept a careful eye on Richard Harrington. The groom's father was holding court near the main bar, but his posture was rigid, his smiles forced and fleeting. Every few minutes, he would discreetly check his phone, his jaw clenching tight enough to crack a tooth. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own making. Only yesterday, my analysts had presented me with the final dossier on Harrington Logistics. The company was hemorrhaging capital, crippled by a series of disastrous acquisitions and gross mismanagement. Without my firm's $3 billion injection on Monday morning, the banks would call in his loans, and the great Harrington dynasty would be liquidated by Friday. I slipped my free hand into the deep pocket of my catering apron, my fingers finding the smooth glass of my personal phone. I waited until I was safely tucked behind a massive, obnoxious floral arrangement near the terrace doors before pulling it out. I typed a rapid, secure message to Marcus, my chief of staff, who I knew was still at the office waiting for my green light. Marcus, prepare the absolute rejection of the Harrington term sheet. Draft the withdrawal of our offer. Do not send it yet. I need it primed and ready for my signal. Marcus's reply came through almost instantly. Understood, Victoria. Are you certain? This will trigger an immediate market panic for his sector. The fallout will be total. I am certain, I typed back, ignoring a sharp spasm of pain in my side. Also, run a deep dive background check on Beatrice Sterling. Look into her personal lines of credit, second mortgages, and any joint accounts she may have opened with Isabella. I want to know exactly how she is funding this charade. Send the PDFs directly to my secure server within the hour. I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as a tuxedoed waiter bumped past me, hissing at me to keep moving. I adjusted my posture, ignoring the searing pain, and stepped back out into the fray. I was no longer just serving caviar. I was walking the perimeter of a trap, double-checking the locks, and waiting for the prey to step squarely onto the trigger. An hour later, my tray was empty, and the physical toll of the evening was beginning to mount. I retreated through the heavy oak doors into the butler's pantry, a narrow, dimly lit corridor that connected the ballroom to the main kitchen. I set the heavy silver tray down on the marble counter with a quiet clatter, leaning forward and resting my forehead against the cool stone cabinets. I needed 2 minutes to breathe, to let the agonizing burning sensation in my abdomen subside. I didn't even get 30 seconds. The pantry doors swung open with violent force, rebounding off the walls. Beatrice stormed into the narrow space, her face flushed red with barely suppressed rage, the heavy silk of her wrap rustling aggressively. She had tracked me down like a predator sensing a weak member of the herd. "What exactly do you think you are doing, Victoria?" She hissed, stepping so close I could smell the gin on her breath beneath the Chanel. "I saw you lingering near the mayor's circle. I told you specifically, stay in the shadows. You are hovering like some kind of pathetic ghoul." I straightened up slowly, refusing to break her gaze, even as my side screamed in protest. "I was offering them appetizers, Mother. That is the function you assigned to me." "Don't you take that tone with me," Beatrice snapped, her eyes narrowing into cold, furious slits. "You are deliberately trying to draw attention to yourself. You want someone to ask who you are so you can play the martyr. Well, it won't work. If you say one word, one single syllable, to any of the Harrington guests about our relation, I will have security drag you out the back door by your hair." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the desperate, clawing ambition in her eyes, the sheer terror of being exposed as ordinary. For years, I had absorbed her insults to keep the peace. Not tonight. "You're very confident in your position here, Mother," I said, my voice calm, quiet, and dangerously level. It was the voice I used in boardrooms when a CEO was lying to me. "But I have to wonder, how are you paying for that dress? Or Isabella's gown?" "Because my admin salary certainly doesn't cover couture. And I know for a fact your personal credit cards have been declined at 3 different boutiques this month." Beatrice froze. The color drained from her face for a fraction of a second before a defensive, ugly sneer replaced it. "How dare you?" she whispered viciously. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You are nothing but a jealous, small-minded little clerk who couldn't secure a man or a life of her own. I manage our finances perfectly, and once Isabella is married into this family, we will never have to worry about money again. The Harringtons are royalty." "Are they?" I countered softly, tilting my head. "Or are you just seeing what you want to see? You're playing a very dangerous game of make-believe, mother." "Listen to me, you ungrateful wretch," she snarled, stepping into my personal space, her finger jabbing hard into my shoulder, right above my collarbone. "After tonight, Isabella and I are moving into a different echelon. We won't need your pathetic little handouts. In fact, if you don't fall in line and do exactly as you are told for the rest of this evening, consider yourself cut off completely. I will erase you from this family. You will never see Isabella again." She stood there, breathing heavily, expecting me to crumble into tears, to beg for her scraps of affection as I had when I was a child. She expected submission. Instead, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of absolute, chilling finality. "I accept your terms, Beatrice," I said, dropping the title of mother for the first time in my life. "You want to sever ties. Done. But remember this conversation. Because when the walls come crashing down, and they will, do not come looking for me to pull you out of the rubble." She scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder, completely missing the genuine warning in my voice. "You are truly pathetic, Victoria," she laughed coldly, turning on her heel. "Get back out there, and don't drop the trays. We can't afford to pay for broken silver." She swept back out into the ballroom, utterly blind to the reality that she had just permanently locked herself out of the only lifeboat available to her. The gala moved into its second hour. The speeches were approaching. I remained in the shadows near the terrace, my phone vibrating relentlessly in my apron pocket. I pulled it out. Marcus had delivered. The screen illuminated with 4 encrypted PDF documents. I opened the first one, my eyes scanning the high-level financial summaries my team had pulled. The reality was far worse than I had anticipated. Beatrice hadn't just maxed out her credit cards, she had leveraged everything. There were massive personal loans, predatory interest rates, and most sickeningly, a second mortgage taken out on the small starter apartment I had quietly purchased for Isabella 3 years ago. A property Beatrice had convinced Isabella to put her name on as a co-signer for credit building. Beatrice was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, entirely liquidating her daughter's future to fund the illusion of wealth required to trap the Harringtons. She was betting everything on Richard Harrington's money saving them. My blood ran cold. Isabella was spoiled and incredibly cruel, deeply poisoned by our mother's worldview, but she was still my little sister. She was being marched to the altar not as a bride, but as a sacrificial lamb for Beatrice's debts. It was time to find out just how deep the brainwashing went. I slipped through the back corridors of the estate, navigating the maze of hallways until I found the extravagant guest powder room. I pushed the door open. Isabella was standing in front of the gold leaf mirror, reapplying her lipstick, her eyes bright with the thrill of the evening. She caught my reflection in the mirror and immediately rolled her eyes. "Victoria, you can't be in here. This is for guests. Go use the staff restroom downstairs, if Richard's mother sees you." I stepped inside and quietly locked the heavy oak door behind me. The loud click echoed in the marble room, making Isabella jump. She turned around, her lipstick suspended in midair. "What are you doing? Unlock that," she demanded, a flicker of genuine nervousness crossing her features. "We need to talk, Isabella," I said, walking toward her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I was entirely composed, which seemed to unnerve her more than anger would have. "And you are going to listen to me, because your entire life is about to collapse." Isabella laughed, a shrill, nervous sound. "Are you insane? My life is perfect. I'm marrying the heir to a global logistics empire. You're just spiraling because Mom put you in a waiter's outfit. Get over yourself, Victoria." "There is no global logistics empire, Isabella," I said flatly, stopping 3 feet away from her. "Richard Harrington is bankrupt." Isabella stared at me, her mouth dropping open for a second before she forced a condescending smirk. "You're lying. You're trying to ruin my night because you're miserable." I don't lie, I replied softly. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened the PDF regarding her own finances, and held the screen up to her face. Look at this. Look at the name on the top of this document. Isabella squinted at the glowing screen. What is this? A bank statement, so what? It's a notice of default, I corrected her, my tone unwavering. On the second mortgage for your apartment, the one you thought you owned free and clear. Our mother took out a $400,000 loan against your property to pay for the designer clothes, the country club memberships, and her half of this ridiculous gala. She is completely broke, Isabella. She has been for years. Isabella's eyes darted rapidly across the digital text, tracking the numbers, the red warning flags, her own forged signature at the bottom. The color rapidly drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking stark and terrified beneath her heavy makeup. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, Mom said she had a trust from Grandpa. She said the Harringtons would cover the rest once we were married. She lied to you, I pushed forward, refusing to let her look away from the truth. She used you as collateral. She is selling you to the Harringtons to pay her debts. And the tragic irony, Isabella, is that the Harringtons are playing the exact same game. Richard's company is billions of dollars in the red. He's desperate for cash. They think they are marrying into our hidden wealth, and Beatrice thinks she is marrying into theirs. You are two drowning families trying to use each other as a life raft, and you are both going to sink to the bottom. Isabella stumbled backward, her hand gripping the edge of the marble vanity. You're making this up. You forged this. You have a boring desk job. How would you even get this information? Because my boring desk job involves auditing companies like Harrington Logistics before I decide whether or not to destroy them, I said, letting a sliver of my true authority bleed into my voice. I am trying to save you from a lifetime of debt and legal ruin. Walk away, Isabella. Tell Richard it's off. Leave with me right now. For a long, agonizing moment, Isabella looked at me. I saw the little girl I used to protect, the sister I had bought groceries for. I saw the terror of realization dawning in her eyes. The spell of our mother's manipulation was fracturing right in front of me, but the poison ran too deep. The fear of losing the fantasy, the terror of facing the reality of our mother's betrayal was too much. Isabella's face contorted into a mask of pure, desperate denial. Shut up. She screamed, slapping the phone out of my hand. It clattered harshly onto the marble floor. Shut up, shut up, shut up. You are a liar. You are nothing. You just want me to be as miserable and alone as you are. She lunged past me, unlocking the door with trembling, frantic hands. Stay away from me, Victoria. Stay away from my new family. She threw the door open and fled down the hallway, leaving me standing alone in the quiet, opulent bathroom. I looked down at my phone on the floor. The screen was cracked, but the document detailing her financial ruin was still perfectly visible. I leaned down, wincing as the surgical staples pulled tight across my abdomen, and picked up the device. Isabella had made her choice. She had chosen the illusion. She had chosen Beatrice. The time for warnings was over. I brushed the dust off my catering uniform, squared my shoulders against the pane, and walked out to deliver the final course. The heavy oak doors of the butler's pantry swung shut behind me for the last time. I stepped back out into the blinding, gilded light of the Harrington ballroom. The atmosphere had shifted. The ambient chatter had died down, replaced by the polite, expectant silence of a captive audience. It was time for the toasts. At the far end of the room, standing on a raised dais draped in white orchids, stood the core players of this tragedy. Richard Harrington held a crystal flute of champagne, his face glistening with a nervous sheen under the spotlight. Beside him stood his son, the groom-to-be, looking appropriately smug. And flanking them, practically vibrating with triumphant energy, were Beatrice and Isabella. My mother had managed to position herself directly in the center of the photographs, her chin tilted upward, basking in the artificial glow of a victory she had not earned. I did not skirt the edges of the room this time. I did not hide in the shadows of the floral arrangements. I gripped my silver tray with both hands, ignoring the sharp, tearing sensation near my ribs, and walked directly down the center aisle of the ballroom. The crowd parted instinctively, annoyed murmurs rippling through the sea of designer gowns as the help dared to interrupt the focal point of the evening. I kept my eyes locked on the dais. Beatrice saw me first. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. She subtly shook her head, her manicured fingers twitching at her sides, mouthing the word no with frantic desperation. She thought I was coming to make a scene, to embarrass her by revealing myself as her daughter in my cheap polyester vest. She had no idea how small her imagination truly was. I stopped at the very base of the dais, planting my feet firmly on the marble floor. Richard Harrington, midway through clearing his throat to begin his speech, glanced down, annoyed by the distraction. His eyes swept over my catering uniform, dismissing me entirely before finally settling on my face. For a second, nothing happened. Then the color drained from his face so rapidly he looked like a corpse. His jaw went entirely slack. His eyes bulged, darting from my face to the uniform, then back to my face, as if his brain was violently rejecting the image in front of him. His hand began to tremble uncontrollably. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, explosive crash, sending a shower of glass and expensive wine across the shoes of the front row guests. The entire ballroom gasped in collective shock. "Mr. Harrington?" Beatrice fluttered forward, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. "Oh my goodness, Richard, are you all right? Someone get a towel for..." "Madam, why are you wearing that?" Richard stammered, his voice cracking, entirely ignoring my mother. He took a stumbling step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked as though the floor was opening up beneath him. "Tell me this is some silly joke and that you aren't pulling your $3 billion funding on Monday." A deathly, suffocating silence fell over the ballroom. 50 of the city's most elite VIPs froze, their eyes darting between the sweating patriarch of the Harrington Empire and the pale woman in the catering apron. Beatrice laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound that echoed painfully in the quiet room. "Richard, darling, you must be confused. She's just a caterer." "She's a nobody, she." "Shut your mouth, Beatrice," Richard roared, his voice cracking with terror. He turned back to me, practically pleading. "Ms. Sterling, Victoria, please. My chief financial officer swore to me the term sheets were finalized. We agreed to the restructuring. Why are you dressed like a servant?" The name dropped like a bomb. "Ms. Sterling, Victoria." Whispers erupted like a wildfire across the room. The titans of industry in the audience, the ones who had ignored me all night, suddenly leaned in, their eyes wide with recognition. "Apex Vanguard, the Phantom CEO, she's here." "I am dressed like a servant, Richard, because my mother ordered me to," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "Beatrice Sterling deemed my usual attire too drab for your esteemed family, and threatened to disown me if I dared to attend my sister's engagement as a guest." Beatrice stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. She looked around at the staring faces of the elite, the very people she had spent her life trying to impress, and saw only contempt and confusion. "Victoria, you, $3 billion," she gasped, her mind completely short-circuiting. "You're a clerk, you work in administration." "I own the administration, Beatrice," I corrected her coldly, never breaking eye contact with Richard. "And Richard, regarding your funding. I came here tonight to see the state of the empire I was about to save. And what I found is a man perfectly willing to throw a lavish, multi-million-dollar party while begging my firm to cover his catastrophic mismanagement. The deal is dead. My chief of staff is withdrawing the offer as we speak." "No, you can't." Richard lunged forward, caught by his son. "We'll lose everything. The banks will liquidate us by Friday." "Then you had better start packing," I replied smoothly. I turned my gaze to my sister. Isabella was standing frozen, her eyes darting between the ruined, weeping Richard Harrington and my calm, steady posture. The illusion was completely shattered. The royalty she was marrying was utterly bankrupt, and the sister she had mocked was the only one holding the keys to the kingdom. "And you, Isabella," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but projecting enough for the room to hear. I tried to warn you in the powder room. I showed you the documents. Your mother forged your signature on a second mortgage against your apartment. She is hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. She didn't arrange this marriage for your happiness. She arranged it because she thought the Harringtons would pay off her loans. Is that true? Richard's son, the groom, suddenly snarled, rounding on Isabella, his previous charm instantly replaced by vicious entitlement. You're broke. Your family is in debt. Isabella looked at the man she was supposed to marry. She saw the absolute disgust in his eyes. He didn't love her, he loved the lie. She looked at Beatrice, who was now sobbing, trying to grab Richard's arm, screaming about a misunderstanding. The final thread of Isabella's brainwashing snapped. The golden child finally saw the cage she had been locked in. Tears streaming down her face, Isabella reached for her hand and violently yanked the massive, blinding diamond engagement ring off her finger. She threw it directly at the groom's chest. It bounced off his tuxedo and rolled away across the marble floor. "Don't ever speak to me again," Isabella whispered to him. Then she turned to Beatrice, her voice trembling with absolute heartbreak and rage. "You used me. You stole from me. You ruined my life just so you could pretend to be rich." "Isabella, darling, please, I did it for us," Beatrice wailed, reaching out. Isabella recoiled as if Beatrice's touch was toxic. Without another word, she picked up the skirts of her heavily embroidered gown, turned her back on the dais, and walked through the crowd. The guests parted for her, their faces masks of pity and shock. I looked at Beatrice one last time. She was completely alone on the stage, surrounded by the shattered ruins of her life's ambition, exposed as a fraud to the entire city. "You wanted me out of the family, Beatrice," I said quietly, the finality ringing in the air. "Consider my resignation accepted." I set the silver tray down on the nearest table, unclipped the scratchy polyester apron, let it fall to the floor, and walked out the front doors of the estate, into the cool, quiet night air. The financial markets opened on Monday morning with the subtlety of a localized earthquake. Apex Vanguard formally and publicly withdrew its letter of intent to finance Harrington Logistics. By noon, Richard Harrington had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The news networks ran the story around the clock, detailing the catastrophic collapse of the old money dynasty. But the financial ruin of the Harringtons was only half the story. My mother's downfall was less publicized, but far more absolute. With the Harrington engagement definitively broken, Beatrice's creditors descended like vultures. The illusion she had maintained for 3 decades evaporated overnight. The bank foreclosed on her heavily leveraged townhouse by Wednesday. Her credit cards were frozen. I watched it all happen from the quiet sanctuary of my penthouse, nursing a cup of tea, the pain in my side finally beginning to dull into a manageable ache. I received frantic, unhinged voicemails from Beatrice, fluctuating between vicious, screaming demands that I fix this, and pathetic, sobbing pleas for a small loan to tide her over. I forwarded every single one to my legal team with instructions to issue a restraining order. She had made her bed with lies, and now she had to sleep in it. Even Aunt Lydia publicly disowned her, banning her from the country club and refusing to take her calls. Beatrice was exiled from the very society she had destroyed her family to join. Late Thursday afternoon, my building's concierge buzzed my private line. "MS. Sterling, there is a young woman down here. She says she is your sister. She doesn't have an appointment, but she is quite insistent. Should I have security escort her out?" I looked out at the city skyline, taking a slow, deep breath. No, send her up. When the private elevator doors opened into my foyer, I barely recognized her. Gone were the heavy makeup, the designer labels, and the haughty posture. Isabella stood there wearing simple jeans and a plain gray sweater. She looked exhausted, pale, and utterly defeated. She carried a single, small duffel bag. She stepped cautiously into my living room, her eyes widening as she took in the understated luxury, the original artwork, the sweeping views of the city. She realized, entirely too late, the true magnitude of the life I had built while she and our mother were mocking me. "Victoria," she said, her voice small, trembling. I didn't know where else to go. The bank locked the doors to the apartment. Everything is gone. Mom is staying at a cheap motel out by the highway. She kept blaming you. She kept screaming that you did this to us. And what do you think? I asked, my tone gentle but firm. Isabella let the duffel bag drop to the floor. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with heavy, racking sobs. I think I was a fool, she cried, the words tumbling out through her tears. I think I let her poison me against the only person who actually cared about me. I was so mean to you, Victoria. I let her treat you like garbage because I was so terrified of not being special. I am so sorry. I know you hate me. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I needed to say I was sorry before I tried to figure out what to do with my life. I walked over to her. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I reached out and gently pulled my little sister into a hug. She collapsed against me, crying into my shoulder like she used to when we were children, before the money and the status had warped our world. I don't hate you, Isabella, I said quietly, smoothing her hair. You were brainwashed by a woman who valued a price tag over her own children, but that ends today. I led her to the sofa and sat her down. I have my legal team unwinding the fraudulent mortgage, I explained, handing her a tissue. I am pressing charges against Beatrice for the forgery. She will face the legal consequences of her actions. She will never be able to use your name, or mine, ever again. Isabella nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. What am I going to do, Victoria? I don't have a degree. I don't know how to do anything real. You learn, I said simply. You're going to stay in my guest room. Tomorrow, you are going to enroll in community college. And if you show me that you are willing to actually work hard, to earn your own way without looking down on anyone else, I will get you an entry-level position in the mailroom at Apex Vanguard. You will start at the very bottom. You will serve coffee. You will be the help, and you will learn the value of $1. A tiny, genuine smile broke through the tears on Isabella's face. It was the first real smile I had seen from her in 10 years. I'll do it, I promise. I'll do whatever it takes. As the sun set over the city, casting a warm, golden glow through the penthouse windows, a profound sense of peace finally settled over me. The venom had been drawn out of the wound. The toxic facade had been demolished. Beatrice was facing the desolate reality she had built for herself, permanently stripped of the power to hurt us. I looked at my sister, broken but ready to rebuild, and knew that for the first time in our lives, we were finally going to be okay. Justice had not just been served, it had set us free.